Welcome to Conscious living in authentic connection and harmony with self, others, and the world. Featuring Ravi and Savitri.
Didn't we talk about a little bit a week or two ago about how we're more receivers than we are transmitters? Our brains and our
Yes, and good
being.
morning, Ravi.
Good morning.
I
Good
love
morning in
that. We,
Satnam.
we did talk about that, and that leads us right into our topic for today, which is to really start thinking about what's our place in the universe based on a little bit of history, long history, short history. We're looking at the history of the United States coming up. We have solstice. And so it's always a moment where we do what you just said.
How is Jyotish or the study of light or astrology, how can that help me, I think, in my personal life or in, we look at history. We talked
Mm-hmm.
about, 84-year cycles, 164-year cycles, 248-year, transit for Pluto, for example. And that feels like a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but we can refer to historical writings or symbology or whatever to kind of tap into how we've evolved over that period of time. But today we're talking about something a little different. And by a little different, I mean a lot, because as far as time is concerned, um, and I think it's interesting because it shows up, I think it shows up cross culturally, like across the globe, different stories, different, and it's interpreted in different ways. So, what we're talking about is yugas,
Yugas.
or
Mm-hmm.
eras, ages. What do you call them?
Well, time spans. They're really time spans. They're durations of time that had specific cultural characteristics and attributes that we can define, and a
Mm-hmm.
duration of time and generations. And it made me think about. Actually, there was just a post. I did repost it. Maybe some people will get it, some didn't. But there was a post where someone wrote an amazing. It was it had just enough detail, but an amazing history of having been born in the 1950s and growing up in the 60s, and some of the things that have changed culturally, going through the technological change, going through cultural changes and socio-political changes, and where we are today. That's a microcosm of what you just mentioned.
Stood out. I remember living in China and everybody, being so proud of the 5,000-year history. And, the America's history was so short, back, however many years it was then, 100 and, or I'm sorry, well, wherever we are now, minus 20 years, let's say.
Right,
So,
right.
um, as we come up on our 250th um, birthday here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think, how much we've lost touch with our own history, even in that span of time. And how little we look to our ancestors, I think just in Western culture. And I know that there's, varying degrees, and some people are very tapped into or tied into that. But I think, in generally speaking, we lose sight very quickly because we're very focused on maybe not even so much the here and now, but like what I want. And I think we kind of have that constant mindset of want and chasing, which is just so antithesis to the yogic way of being, of
Yes.
allowing and appreciating and allowing and being. And when we stand back and we talk about these yugas, hopefully it will bring a little bit of insight into where we really stand here in this moment and what that really means.
Yeah, I find it interesting, being one of those individuals that was born in the 1950s. You can decide whether it was earlier to 1950 or earlier to 1960. My secret. You choose. But when I think about that, and I think about having gone through education, just like we do, and learning about time. And there was the time that was um, written in the Bible. There's time there. We've got 7 days. The yugas actually are an expanded version of those 7 days, but that is something that I'm just going to seed that. That isn't really anything maybe we can go too deeply in today, but each of those days has an expanded solar year time around it, which I think we think of in terms of it being logical, right, and reasonable. And then the archaeological time, where we have history of 5,000 years. That was like the magic number. 5,000 years ago, that was when there was the first information about humans. Now we know, and keeping up with some of the education still going on in schools about some of these things, the time span has gone back and gone back and gone back. When we go to the Hindu philosophies, and you mentioned China, China has a very long history, much longer than 5,000 years. Their dynasties, go on and on and on into the past, just like the yugas in the Hindu philosophy go back in time for large number of years. There are 4 individual yugas, and they each have cultural characteristics that take us through an evolution. But when we look at how cultures evolve through a cycle, each of the yugas have a particular characteristic of growth and destruction over the 4. And so to simplify it, I'll do that. But if we look at the Maha Yugas, which is the entire cycle of descending and ascending, because we move through it in a different way. It's not circular. It's 4.32 billion, that's with a B, like baby years. And the wrapping our head around that, just take a moment to breathe into it. And before we started our session today, our podcast, we were talking about looking at the stars at night and feeling like we're not even a speck of dust in comparison. We talk about 4.32 billion years. It's beyond comprehension almost.
I think it is. I think at that point, and that's something that's kind of interesting because we think about that in terms of dollars. And when people do that comparison of, how long it would take to earn, this, like, a million versus a billion, or, how many seconds are in a million, whatever, versus a billion. Google it to know what I'm talking about,
Right.
because our brains just can't really conceptualize. I don't think most brains can conceptualize really what that means, that leap in number. And it's it's so complex. And I guess in my Pisces mind go right to, there is no time and there is no space, and there is, it's time is just a human construct. But even it's interesting because even though we've constructed that concept to have meaning for us, even that we can barely just wrap our minds around, you
Yeah.
know, what
Yeah.
that means for the 4 point
Yeah. So
whatever billion years.
I guess if we want to get a feel for it, we could look at the stars at night. If you're able to find a place where you can really see the stars and maybe the Milky Way as well, you can take a deep breath and notice the relevance of each of our moments, and really not to denigrate our life in that way, but to begin to appreciate each moment as a gift in contrast, in comparison to that long, amazing warp of association time. Uh, our time is not at all relevant if you think about it that way, but our time is absolutely every minute relevant.
Exactly. It's that paradoxal
Mm-hmm.
way of being that we often talk about, that it's and both. It's not either or, it's and both. Not that I don't want to go deep into these, but to mention the Yugas, the Sat Yug, the Age of Truth or the Golden Age,
Mm-hmm.
um, the Treta Yug, the Silver Age. And they go, again, we're talking about over, so, and in the Kundalini tradition, the like the Sat Yug, one was 1,728,000 years long. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the age that we're currently in, Kali Yuga, or Yug, I guess, or you can say however the different
Right. Mm-hmm.
pronunciations, um, is known as the Age of Steel or the Machine Age, where we have the least connection, the least, our connection with the divine is least stable. It's like it's real
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
tenuous, and we can lose that connection if we're not actively tuning into it. And so when we talk about, well, why do we, what is time? What are these yugas? Why doesn't it, why do we care? It's because if we're really, in this moment, goes back to this moment that is, that means nothing but means everything if we're tuning into that vibration at this time where that connection is most tenuous, most fragile, most, easily disconnected. That the more of us that are living in alignment with ourselves, our authentic nature, and therefore the divine, the greater our evolutionary process can be. Even,
Yes.
for us on a personal level, for us on a social level, for us on the beyond what we can imagine level. I mean, I'm sure others have heard about those studies that have been done by Buddhist monks who have, through meditation and prayer, healed, created healing in the past, or so. And like we've talked about, touching the window of the soul. When you are in that space of meditation, that point of zero, shunya, when you become zeroed out and you have that sustained connection with the divine, you then transcend all time. You tap in, to those highest, you can tap into the highest vibration, or frequencies, or all of, of all those eras and ages and years and times. You bring it down to that single point of union, and
Mm-hmm.
you are that. I am that.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, that's, it's because that is unfathomable, that being intentional with every moment does matter.
Yeah. 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 And, there are some descriptors that go into each one of the yugas, of which there are four.
Right.
But I mentioned they operate in a way that's not circular. So, moving from Satya to Treta to
Uh-huh.
Dwapara and then to the Kali Yuga. So we descend. And when you think about it, you were talking about um, Satya being the truth. And then we move through social mores and a little bit of disintegration until we come to the Kali Yuga. You mentioned the machine age, but it's also a time where the traditions begin to erode and individuals begin to impose their belief systems on others, and it's more authoritarian. Where Satya is much more, I will say, egalitarian, maybe even utopian, so that there's freedom. And we think about maybe a mini age that might be there. We go from the Dark Ages, which we know is a European time frame. We had the Dark Ages, and then we came to an age of light, the Renaissance. And that is more circular in the way that it occurred. So with the yugas, we have descending and ascending. So each of the yugas have a different duration. But what happens when you get to Kali is that we don't go right back to Satya, We actually repeat Kali and then come back up to Satya. So it takes a little more time to get there. That's why that 4.3 billion years is really intensive to go through all of those from one Satya Yuga down and back up. Just to give us a sense, I mentioned the time in the Bible about the 7 days of creation, but anybody that's interested in the math, you can do this and figure it out. But there's a thing called the divine years. And there are 144,000 solar years, that's our year, to 400 divine years. So if you want to start thinking about taking that 4.3 billion and converting it to solar years, I'm sorry, that is solar years, convert it back to the divine years, you might be interested to see what the answer might be and how close it comes to some of the ways that we talk about time of creation in different cultures. Yeah.
Right, which is, I think, what's interesting is when you look at different creation stories, they you can tie them back to the yugas, or the and as we talked about, because solstice is coming up, and when we talked
Yes.
about, I don't know if we were talking about it on winter solstice, I think maybe. Um, what is the rest of the world doing? And, what are those folks along the equator doing at solstice? That's
Mm-hmm.
different than, it's just like, and that conversation brought me into a deeper understanding of the meaning that people make in their lives in different parts of the planet is dependent on what they see in the sky from their location and how that relates to their ability to survive on Earth. And that is what we're doing all the time. Personal planets, understanding their characteristics
Uh-huh.
and their transits and their cycles can help you find your path and do your diligent duty here on earth and all that. But they're almost, that beyond. It is so awe inspiring and overwhelming to even begin to understand the immensity of the divine and creation. And I say this with it's such an understatement, but it is so humbling. There's that Christian belief that every knee shall bow, and if you would see the face of God, you would fall to the ground and tremble. And I think that there's a lot of contriving that into fear as far as, that the way the application of what that means. But from my perspective, when you see the immensity and yet the it is so beyond what you ever could have thought or ever thought you could, what you understood. And it is, I don't want to say humiliating, but it can be if you're not able to let go of the ego and just be
Right.
humbled by all that is and all that was and all that will be and what your little place in it is. And as soon as you get a glimpse and maybe even begin to understand how little you understand, then poof,
It's gone.
here you are. And it's back to, oh my God, what do I need to make for dinner? And I have to go to work tomorrow and I'm going to be late for this and that. And it's our back to our silly little games. But I do appreciate having the understanding of the yugas even on that, because it gives us, it's a tool that we can use to maybe even for a moment so brief really understand how little everything matters and how much everything matters.
Well, and know that humanity has been here before many
Right.
times, and
Yeah.
they as a collective humanity has made choices about things. And what I heard you say, which I really sparked with me, was that as an individual, here we are in a body, and two things. One is we hold that connection to the divine, regardless of what yuga we're in, whether it be yuga of truth, satya, or yuga of deterioration and aggression in Kali. We hold that as a placeholder for those that need that kind of light and influence in their life. And yeah, you mentioned solstice. Solstice is coming up at 3:24 Central Daylight Time. That's June 21st. And the moon will be in Uttara Falguni, which I find very interesting in the dialogue that we had. And now here we go. Where will the mind, the moon, be in the cosmos? Uttara Falguni is about holding on to traditions. It's about keeping your promises, maintaining commitments, having strong discernment for the way of life that brings a sense of order, but a sense of order with flexibility in that it doesn't recognize one right way. It recognizes cultural traditions, promises based on the circumstances and the dharma of the individuals that are involved in that. And so Uttara Falguni is often seen as the marriage nakshatra, that cosmic area in the sky, where you make a vow, you make a commitment, you make a promise. And we do that first to ourselves. We promise to ourselves, and then we promise to others. So rituals, ceremonies, and the other thing that summer solstice brings to us is the International Day of Yoga. So there'll be things happening today and tomorrow to celebrate that. And the United Nations brought that into being. Modi brought it forward and it was accepted. I'm thinking this, oh, don't quote me on this because I've been with this for a few years, but I think this is year 13. I'm not sure, but I will mark it in the description to let us know which year it is. And worldwide, people practice yoga together. So we'll be doing that, I'm sure. I have a plan for that for Sunday morning. And I hope you all can take a moment to practice in the way that you practice.
Right. It is a time, and whatever your modality is, it is a time to reflect, to
Mhm.
correct course, and to lay down new foundations. Foundations that will be more established and stronger foundations for you. So whatever your practice is, whatever that brings up for you, that's going to be different for all of us. But this is a really powerful time to do that with intentionality and to really, do some journaling. I have been doing more journaling lately, and I guess, more intentional journaling. Um, or I guess I don't want to say, because that's not quite right either. Intentional in the time that I'm like, okay, a thought comes up, okay, sit down and just jot that down, and then I'm really surprised at what comes up.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of times we think, oh, I don't, well, my journal's not here, I have to go in the other room, or I gotta get up and do it, start writing and see what comes up, because this is a really rich time for some revelations and some noticings that might help you correct course in very small ways that can lead to completely different outcomes.
Mhm.
So, yeah. And when we take the time to sit and notice and reflect and be in practice, it really gives us the most fertile soil to work with, and planting our new, planting the seeds for whatever it is that we want to grow.
Right. Or prune the ones that we've already sprouted.
That
That
too.
too.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
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 And when you do that pruning, it makes me think, we out at the farm, a couple of years ago, um, well, several years ago, we planted some fruit trees. We, meaning my mom or my dad, probably. I just use the collective we when we talk about family. I'm like, this is mine, ours. It's all one and the same. But and there's really, it's beautiful peach trees, and my mom has made some really delicious peach pies from the peaches. A couple years ago, she pruned them back, and I mean, when you prune a fruit tree, you really, I mean, you gotta go further than you think
Hmm.
with it. Um, and you think, oh my gosh, this is too much. I'm taking too much off. And, but it's so necessary. But
Hmm.
there may be a period, or a year that needs to go by before that fruit will bear again, and then it comes through in abundance. And it's a reminder that when we make those changes, we sometimes have to be a little bit patient before we see new outcomes. So if you're making those little changes, don't forget to just sit tight and hang on, and don't go back to old ways when we don't see the fruits of our labor immediately. Give yourself time to rest and heal and nurture your soil and tend to yourself, and allow what needs to come through, because that process, it takes time, depending on how deep those wounds went, and how deep our roots, we've buried our roots into different aspects of our lives.
And I think that's the other perspective to Uttara Falguni, because when we think about making promises, commitments to do something or be with someone or have that kind of traditional um, way of thinking, just for some things, maybe not everything, but we begin to set a stage for a repetitive and hopefully beneficial way of traveling our dharmic path. Uh, so the perspective you were talking about, it also happens in Uttara Falguni, because when we bring ourselves to a focal point, there's all this other stuff over here that used to be part of our vision, and we need to prune that a bit um, in a way that gives us enough space and energy to be able to focus on the things that we've determined are important and that require commitment and tapas, a little bit of discipline, and patience and compassion and all those other things that happen depending on what it is, either to ourselves or if it's to a business partner or a significant other. Maybe it's to family members in different ways. When when we narrow our commitments, we prune away other things that um, maybe are priorities, but may have to wait until later when the fruit starts to ripen again on the new growth. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that it's not just one way or the other. It's both.
Right. Well, and I think it's such a great point that you brought up to that. We're not always just planting and growing new things, and we have to clear out the old growth in the garden as well,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that our new plants are healthy. So
Mm-hmm.
and have space to grow. So yeah, we're just gonna do go on another spin around the sun, and we'll meet back here again in June of next year and see what has come of our reflections and course correction and whatever foundations we're laying right now in this moment. So take a
Yeah.
minute, jot it down, do some practice around it, and sit with it, and then revisit it in the coming years and see where you are. So
Yeah.
that's just our little reminder for today that
Thank you, everyone. It's been a
enjoy
joy
the
and a pleasure
solstice
once
weekend.
again to share with you, and please share with others. Um, if you think this would be interesting to someone, we might know someone that might enjoy the podcast, please send it along. And like, comment. We are coming up to another time where we'll be gathering our comments, and a podcast will be designated to answering questions, responding to your comments. So we want to hear from you.
Yep. So leave us a comment and join us again next week, and we'll be here, and we hope you are too. Satnam.
Namaste.